Doctor is considering a new medication to help fight infections. However, the medication has a possibility of being highly toxic to the patient. You will test the medicine to determine toxicity. Okay. So in other words, I can give you a medicine to help your headache, but it might make you sick and puke. Is it worth the risk? So we're going to test this medicine to determine the level of toxicity, or toxicity is a fancy word for how poisonous is it. All right, so why are we testing the medicine? We're testing it because we want to see if it's toxic, which means our null is the medicine is not toxic. What about type 1 and type 2? Type 1, I convince you that it's toxic, and in fact it isn't. So type 1 is decide the medicine is toxic when it really is not. Type 2 is the other direction, decide the medicine is not toxic when it really is. And in this context, what would the general populace actually consider to be more serious? And I think if you really think about it, type 2 has actually got a little more bite to it. Putting poisonous medicine out there that we're claiming is going to cure something is going to have a lot more harmful effect in the long run. Alright, flu vaccine claims to prevent a certain type of flu, and 70% of the people are vaccinated. In a test, vaccinated people are exposed to the flu. Is this claim too high? So, we're going to go through certain decisions that are made and decide whether or not they're good decisions, and if they're not, then what type of error was actually physically made in that. So let's take one more crack at the statement and make sure we understand that this is true, or that we understand what the statements are trying to say. So we got a flu vaccine that claims to prevent claims to prevent flu in 70% of the people who are vaccinated. Okay, so a highly effective vaccine. In a test, vaccinated people are exposed to the flu. Is this claim too high? In other words, so we're checking to see, is it higher than, is 70 too high? In other words, we think the percent of people getting the flu is actually lower than that. So we decide the true proportion of vaccinated people who do not get the flu is less than 70, when in fact it really is less than 70. Okay, so that is what we call a correct decision, right? We did just fine. Okay, so I'm going to change the verbiage and see if we can identify whether correct or if it's an error of some type. We decide the true proportion of vaccinated people who do not get the flu is not less, when in fact it really is. Okay, and that would be a type 2 error. So I gather evidence that it's, I should have been successful in showing that it is not less, instead of us thinking that it is less. Okay. So this whole idea about type 1 and type 2 error sort of brings up the question, how do we decide which level of significance does one even use? How do we know where to put this line as far as what percent of our data should be rare enough for us to think is evidence or not? And in real life, that is where sort of the consequences of type 1 and type 2 error come in. So CEOs and other organizations stop and have conversations about, well, give me best worst case scenario. What would happen if, in the Firestone case, what would happen if we lower the cost of, or lower the standards of the tires? What would be the consequence? And I would hope someone would raise their hand at the board meeting and go, well, if we lower the quality of our tires, if we lower the quality of our products, that means people could get hurt. And then someone of importance would follow it up and go, well, what would that cost us? How much would it cost if we did it anyways? And they make that sort of decision as far as whether they want type 1 or type 2 to be worse. Okay, so once you've had that discussion about consequences, then you can identify which level of significance you want to go with.